Receive a cordial greeting. Welcome to 20th lecture of the Phase A of this self-knowledge course, titled, The Psychological Country. This lecture will teach us about that space of our inner world that our psychological country is. We will see that the different places of our psychological country are where we go every time one of our many psychological defects manifests itself and takes us out of the here and now. And it is also where we go every time our physical body falls asleep, and we go there to dream, and it is where we go every time our physical body dies. And this subject is very interesting because by studying and understanding this, we will understand why it is so important to get out of the mistake of believing ourselves to be good people. We are going to learn the importance of living in the present moment, the instant, the here and now, and we will see how to do it. And we are going to learn how to begin to shift our center of gravity, which is currently only around the things of personality, to move it towards the things of consciousness, so that we can start that wonderful path back to the source. Then, let's start by reflecting on what is the psychological country? Unquestionably, just as the external country in which we live exists, so also in our intimacy, the psychological country exists, but most of us are unaware of it. Each one of us is a microcosm, that is, a universe in miniature, since within each one of us there is a vast inner world in which, as we studied in lectures 5 and 6, all the dimensions are found. But we don't know ourselves, we don't have control or management of our inner world, but it is our ego that has our essence locked up, and therefore, we move in a small space of our psychology that we can call the psychological country. Just as there is an external country in which we live and move, regulated by laws and full of inhabitants, likewise, in our psychological country there are places and inhabitants. But, due to lack of self-observation, we commonly do not know how to identify where we are, in our psychological country, at a given moment. None of us is ignorant of where he physically lives. However, most of the time, we do not know the psychological place where we are located. And this is because our entire lives we have dedicated ourselves to the development and sharpening of our 5 physical senses, which allow us to know where we are physically located, and to be alert to any news, or any dangerous person, or place around us. But, since we have never dedicated ourselves to developing that internal sense, or third eye, which is the capacity for self-observation, we normally ignore when in our inner world, and more specifically in our psychological country, we have entered those dark and dangerous spaces that exist in our psychology. We know at any given moment the place where we are physically, but without even remotely suspecting, the place of the psychological country in which we have gotten ourselves. We can see that just like in the external country in which we live, there are very beautiful and pleasant places. Likewise, in our psychological country, there are very beautiful places. Like those we psychologically go to when we are in love, and where we have such pleasant emotions, and imagine such beautiful scenes. All those scenes take place in our psychological country. But just as in a pleasant moment we can feel, think, and imagine beautiful and pleasant things, in unpleasant moments of fear, anguish, worry, anger, etc., we psychologically move in very ugly, and sometimes very wicked, places. Because just as in the external country in which we live there are ugly places, where perverse and horrible things happen, so there are places in our psychological country. But we must know that the inner world is not governed by the same number of laws as the physical world. The physical world is governed by 48 laws or limitations to which we are subject, and among them are the laws that govern movement in time and space. In order to move from one place to another in the physical world we must travel a certain distance, which takes a certain amount of time. In the inner world, where emotions and thoughts are managed, these limitations do not exist, and we can move from one place in our psychology to another, at the speed of thought. We can go from being sad, and therefore being in grey and rainy places in our psychology, accompanied by quite gloomy characters, to be angry, and therefore enter very violent places in our psychology, accompanied by angry and irritable characters, at the speed at which we change our thoughts. And it all depends on the kind of people who accompany us. Since just like in the external world there are all kinds of people, cultured people, honorable people, good people, as well as dishonest people, cruel, wicked, and nasty people. Thus, within us, there is a multiplicity of people who manifest themselves in us from moment to moment, making us think in this or that way, feel this or that, and do this or that, depending on the circumstance we are experiencing, or the state of mind we have at the moment. Within our psychological country each one has their companions, those are all our different ways of being, all the psychological defects, or selves that make up our ego. And these will take us where they should take us, according to their psychological characteristics. We can see that at one point we behave in a nice and friendly way, that we are probably being accompanied by friendly and polite selves of our psychology. But if something, or someone, makes us angry, we behave rudely, moved, and directed by very different selves. Thus, if someone moves us lust, we behave lustfully, if we are moved by greed, we behave dishonestly, etc. And so, we will be moving from one psychological state to another, from one place in our psychological country to another, depending on the defect that is moving in us at that moment. There's an old saying that goes, "Tell me who you are with, and I'll tell you who you are." And this is because the companions we have always tend to define the places we frequent. Just as if in the physical world we only have drunk friends, we will tend to visit bars. And if we tend to spend time with friends who are addicted to drugs, then we will frequent places where drugs are sold and used. Or if we are related to people who frequent brothels, we will end up in brothels. Or if we regularly go out with business people, we will end up in business meetings. Or if we get together with musicians, we will go to concerts, rehearsal venues, etc. Likewise, within ourselves, the companions we have, which are our different selves, will be taking us to different places in our psychological country. And this is what really defines us, those internal companions, and psychological places where we constantly move are what make us who we really are, many times regardless of our external characteristics. Because we can see that externally we can project one thing, while internally we are something totally different. Externally, we can be located in a certain place and pretend to be a certain kind of people, while in our psychological country, we are in completely opposite places, thinking, feeling, and desiring other things. We could illustrate this with some examples. We could see a virtuous lady, a magnificent wife, with exemplary behavior, faithful, decent, honorable, physically located in a beautiful mansion. But she could find herself inside a prostitution den within her psychological country, due to her lustful psychological defects. Because all day long she is being carried away by her lustful selves, such as when she sees the gardener, the neighbor, or a handsome actor on the movie. And she imagines all kinds of lustful scenes, and feel all kind of lustful emotions. Or because she is found all the time criticizing a young single neighbor, who receives frequent male visitors. And this lady, in her psychological country, is imagining all kinds of lustful and prostitution scenarios in which she places her neighbor, without realizing that all of this is taking place in her own psychological country, and that these places exist in her imagination, because all those defects that she is projecting onto her neighbor live inside her, while she feels very honorable and pure. But we could also see a gentleman, known for being impeccably honest, very honorable, and a good citizen. We could find him in a business meeting neatly dressed. But within his psychological country, he can find himself located inside a den of thieves, due to his robbery selves, which are inside his unconscious mind. And although he seeks to appear very honorable, internally he could be planning how to take advantage of that business, how to make the other do badly so that he is promoted, what strategy to use to break the competition to keep the market's monopoly. And why not? He can even find himself planning how to steal the amount of money he needs to supply some luxury or necessity. Reflecting on this, we can see that what is seen on the outside is not always compatible with the reality within, As the old saying goes, faces we see, hearts we do not know. We could even see a monk cloistered in a monastery, while internally he could be located in a colony of murderers, gunmen, thieves, drug addicts, precisely because of his subconscious selves, so unconsciously submerged in the depths of the most difficult recesses of his psyche. Because although it may seem incredible, crime is also hidden in the incense of prayer. Under the sacred dome of the most divine sanctuaries, crime is dressed in the mantle of holiness and the sublime word. The external is just a facade. What we carry internally, in our psychology, is what truly defines us. And if we really want to awaken our consciousness, we must first realize who lives in our psychological country, and in what dark inner places they keep us trapped. Sometimes, you see cases of people who are considered to be very good people, who, from one moment to the next, it turns out that they have killed someone, it turns out that they have raped their daughter, or suddenly it is discovered that they were cheating. And so on. What happens is that we don't really know ourselves, and we don't want to face our own perversity. We want to believe that we are good people, even if that means living in self-deception. But faced with a difficult situation, we react badly and make a mistake. And what is it that we tend to do after that? We blame the circumstance, or other people, but we don't see what was always moving inside of us. We don't observe our own psychological defects, alive within us, who are the ones who drive us, and who, if we don't observe ourselves, and if we do not eliminate them through psychological death, sooner or later, in the right circumstances, they will lead us to commit all kinds of mistakes that we will only regret later. And even worse, they will never allow us to awaken our consciousness, since all those negative ways of being that we carry inside are the ones that have our consciousness trapped. We must understand that believing ourselves to be good people will not make us conscious, and that trying to be good people will not make us conscious. It will only continue to feed that false concept that we have created of ourselves, that is precisely the one that does not let us wake up, because it convinces us that we are fine, that we don't need to change. It convinces us that we are model citizens, exemplary people, because we have not killed anyone, we do not steal, we don't do drugs, we don't harm anyone, and that this means that we are very good people. And so, we think that this thing of knowing oneself, and that of eliminating psychological defects is perfect for others, but that we are thin just as we are. But we don't realize that all people in this world are just mirrors where our inner wickedness is reflected. The same defect that you are pointing out and judging in others exists within you, and that is why you are pointing them out and judging them, because you have no understanding about it. Only when we dare to see and recognize that we are not as good as we think, nor as honorable as we want to appear, and rather we dare to observe ourselves as we are and to face our own darkness, to face all the psychological selves that constantly manifest in our mind, in our imagination, in our emotion, in our instinct and in our sex. And we decided to judge ourselves mercilessly and stop looking for external culprits for our reactions and wrong ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, then we can really start an inner revolution that leads us to a radical change. An inner revolution that brings light to that darkness that exists in our psychological country. That is why it is said that there is much virtue in the wicked, and much wickedness in the virtuous. Because he, who is a bad person, and accepts his wickedness is at least honest with himself, and has a much better chance of changing, because he understands that he has hit rock bottom, because he recognizes himself as a pervert. On the other hand, the one who thinks that he is a very good person, having so much wickedness hidden inside, will never change, because he is convinced that he doesn't need it. And he will continue to be wandering in his psychological country wherever his defects want to take him, even to the most wicked, perverse, and dark places. So, how do we stop wandering in our psychological country wherever our defects want to take us? Learning to live in the instant, in the present moment, by practicing psychological death at all times. We must learn to recognize each time that a psychological defect is taking us out of the here and now, to take us to another psychological place, and to another psychological moment. The only place and time where our consciousness can manifest is here and now. Our physical place and our psychological place must always be the same, here and now, being aware of ourselves. We must strive to stay living in the present moment. And every time an ego in the mind, for example, leads you to be dreaming in the past, or to be worried about the future, you must become aware that it is taking you out of the present moment. Every time you are imagining, every time you let your consciousness fall asleep by fantasizing any kind of things, you must become aware that a psychological defect has taken you out of the present moment to another place in your psychological country, and you must return. And every time you become identified with any of your defects, and you are about to start reacting, or you already did, you must become aware of the defect that take consciousness away, and that dragged you into a psychological den. Through self-observation from moment to moment, we can discover each of those places and psychological caves where ourselves want to take us. Be attentive and observe. Where has this defect of anger, resentment, intolerance that I am feeling taken me psychologically? To what layer of lust does this morbid, lascivious, adulterous thought want to take me? To what dark cave of my inner world am I going to torture that person whom I am criticizing, judging, and pointing fingers at? And each ego that you manage to discover, you are going to judge it, until you realize that it is a psychological defect, and that it must die. And then, you are going to appeal to that force of your consciousness that has the power to transform you, which is your particular Divine Mother, and you mentally ask her, Divine Mother, eliminate this defect from me. You ask for the elimination of every defect you discover at every moment. And you will see how within your inner world, in your psychological country, a true transformation will take place. And also in the astral world, which is that world of dreams that we visit every time we go to sleep, we are going to experience the transformation of that psychological country. If before everything was darkness and unconsciousness, if we went out all the time to the world of dreams to live all kinds of dark things, without having the slightest awareness of being out of the body, now we will experience the changes. If you are constantly striving to be awake during the day by eliminating all defects that try to get you out of the here and now, that will begin to be reflected in that you will be able to gain more and more consciousness in the astral plane, and you will develop the ability to realize when you are not in the physical, but in the astral plane. If, for example, you find yourself dreaming in a place that is supposed to be your home, but is not, you will have the conscience to say, no. This is not my house. This is a dream. And thus, knowing yourself consciously in the astral world, it is urgent to start working on ourselves, practicing, so that we begin to wake up. Much has been speculated over time about where we go when we die. And the answer to that question is closer and clearer than we think. When we die, we go to our psychological country. Just like every night, when we go to sleep, our soul leaves the physical body so that it can be recharged by the vital body. And our soul goes out to that inner world to have experiences in that psychological country, but it goes completely unconscious, asleep, carried to any part of our psychology by any of our multiple psychological defects. And we are not capable of realizing that we are dreaming, no matter how absurd the experience may be, we do not realize that we are in the astral plane. Likewise, when the physical body dies, our soul will also pass to that other dimension, with the difference that the silver cord, which is the cord that holds the physical body and the soul together, and that allows us to return to our body every time we wake up, will now be cut off by the angel of death. And we will stay there, in our unconsciousness, repeating the same actions, projecting all the desires of our mind and our emotions, without having any control over us, and being taken from one state to another by mechanical laws. After death, each one continues to live in the same psychological place as always. The thief in the thieves' den will continue, the lechers in the brothel will continue. As a ghost of bad omen, the choleric, the furious, will continue to live in the dangerous alleys of vice and anger. Until, due to a mechanical law, which is the law of return, they have to return to another physical body, if they still have some existence left as a human, or return in another kingdom of nature, if they have already exhausted their existences as human. But we must remember that the very essence, that which we really are, is very beautiful. It came from above, from the stars, and unfortunately it is embedded within all these egos that we carry within. The essence can retrace the path, return to the original starting point, return to the stars, but first we must free her from the bad companions who have her trapped in the suburbs of perdition. We have to release each of the portions of our consciousness trapped in each of our defects. If we awaken consciousness, if we eliminate each one of those selves that keep us dreaming and do not allow us to wake up, when the time comes for the physical body to die, we will pass into that other dimension with full consciousness. And we can simply decide what to do, where to go, and what steps to take, to continue advancing in our spiritual development. If we manage to be conscious in the day-to-day, we will have consciousness in the astral. And we will have consciousness after death. But let's remember that the idea is not to die physically, but to free ourselves from death, through psychological death, and achieve eternal life by fully developing our essence, since it is immortal. To achieve this, it is urgent that we transfer to the essence our magnetic center, which we have established abnormally in our false personality. Since with the magnetic center established in our illusory personality, we will continue to live in the most abominable psychological dens, although in everyday life we are magnificent citizens. We must become aware of the things in which we have our magnetic center. For example, a seller will have his center of gravity revolving around his sales, his customers, his profits, and his losses. A musician will have it at his concerts, his rehearsals, and his fans. A housewife will have her center of gravity at home, cleaning, taking care of her children and her husband. A lawyer in his trials and his clients. What is your current center of gravity? What do you spend most of your time and energy on? Reflect on the importance and the need to begin to transfer the center of gravity from the personality to the essence, by taking time and energy away from the things of the personality and dedicating it to the practices that will lead you to the awakening and development of your consciousness. When the magnetic center is established in the consciousness, that is, in the essence, then the return of the total man to the stars begins. And well, this has been today's conference. Remember to leave any questions you have, and we will gladly solve them. I invite you to the next conference in which we will talk about how to develop the power of concentration, and how to be permanently relaxed. A very important lecture. Don't miss it. Until next time.